Thank you very much, Bogdan. And talking about VDEM, we will actually have a regional VDEM institute in Australia very soon. We are working on that right now. So if you are interested in the data, there's some more coming up soon. Yeah, it's really nice to be here today. We were just chatting about my experience of participating in SICSS in 2017 in Helsinki. It was really a summer school back then because it was summer in Finland, but it was really cold. And we were just talking about going to the sauna in between the breaks. So that was... Yeah, and here it's rather like a winter school, but I mean, winter in Australia is also a nice experience, I think, if you compare it to other regions in the world. All right, so it's really nice to be here. Bogdan already did a great job introducing myself. If you want to check out what I'm doing, there's also the link to my website. And yeah, I'm really interested in democracy and democratic decline and authoritarianism, and comparing different countries at scale was also what brought me to those computational methods. But originally, I'm a very qualitative researcher. So I just learned those methods step by step by investigating interesting research questions. So it was a journey, so to say. All right, and about this workshop, I was thinking first I start with a few slides, but then it would be also really nice if we could make this a little bit more hands-on. But this very much depends whether you were able... Can you actually read this? Is it a bit small print, right? I hope you can follow up on the slides. Yeah, there's another version up there, so you could... Nice setup. Anyway, like this hands-on part very much depends whether you were able to prepare. So let me just briefly check who was able to install R on their laptop. All right, so most of you. Who doesn't have R installed yet? All right, all have R installed. RStudio as well? Perfect, so this is already really good. Were you also able to download this open source Ollama model? Did that work out for you? Who was not able to download it? The small llama model? So all downloaded that, really good. This is really nice. And then who was able to sign up for an API key with OpenAI? Not so many. I don't want to force you doing this, right? Because you have to provide your billing information and then you have to pay a little. But for this workshop here today, it will be just a few cents. And I recommend actually doing this, just because it's a better experience to see how well these closed models perform. So you also get a better assessment, you know, to compare open source with closed models and make a more informed decision what kind of models you would like to use. I'm not advertising OpenAI or closed models. I'm here to advertise open source models, right? And I think we need much more money to make open source models better. But nevertheless, I think it's good to check the enemy out, so to say. So I think like for running the tutorial later on, for fully running it without any changes, you would need an API key. And you can sign up for an API key on the OpenAI Playground. I think I also provided the instructions. So if you still want to do that, there's still time before the tutorial. And then you can just run it without an error message. And otherwise, you can also later on make some adjustments and just work with the open source model throughout. But the model you downloaded, this Llama model, is really like a very, very small open source model. It has 1 billion parameters, and this might sound like a lot, but it's actually a very small model. So don't expect anything. It's basically grab. Like, it's not a good model. It's good for educational purposes because you can still do something with it, and it will say hello to you and stuff like that. But it will not perform well, right? This is just something to know. And then later on, you can also download bigger open source models and run it on your machine. And these bigger models are then also a little bit better. All right, so if you have not yet signed up for an API key and you would like to do so, you can do so while I'm talking here, presenting a few slides. And then later on, we will make this a little bit more hands-on. All right, and before I start, just a very useful differentiation here. I think we can use LLMs as a research assistance tool, and this might be also covered. I think I had a look in the program, it is covered. This is more like, for example, vibe coding. I don't like this term, but it's like using some kind of assistance tool to help you with setting up your code, to help you with your workflows, and this is really great. I still think the human factor here is important, so you check. Like, this is also why I don't like vibe coding, because if you are actually not able to follow up on what the tool is proposing, it's a little bit problematic, because then you just give up control. So I always advise, do vibe coding, but also follow up on what the tool suggests and try to understand what the tool does. But anyway, this is great, but it's not directly integrated into your research design. And what I'm going to present today is LLMs as a research methodology. So this is directly integrated in your research design. You would describe this in your methods part, in your dissertation, in your papers, wherever, right? So it's really something where you are very transparent about and where you directly integrate this in your methodological approach. Yeah. All right. And yeah, how did we get there to integrate LLMs in our research workflows and our methodologies? And this is based on recent literature. There's quite a few pieces coming up, and they all use LLMs, and they all come to this conclusion that they can be very effective, for example, in classifying political speeches, in analyzing different media sources, and so on. So it's a very effective tool, but it can only complement our existing methodologies. So it's not something which will fully replace our old established methods. And also it needs proper validation. So us checking the output of LLMs, us checking the entire workflow will remain really important. Yeah, and then we have something like the quant-qual dilemma. I always like to think it's gone, but I see it every day. It's unfortunately not really gone yet. But I do think that LLMs have great potential bridging this divide, because LLMs can provide us with this nuance, with this context, which we typically have only due to qualitative research, but then they can also do that at scale. So I think this is really like very powerful. But again, to integrate this properly in your research workflows, it needs to be validated. We need to be very transparent how we integrate it, and we need to provide traceability, as I call it, right? So we need to provide our colleagues with each and every step we did and each and every decisions we made on the way on how we integrated the LLMs in our workflow. Yeah, and this package which we built, quallmer as it is called, this was also developed with all those principles and goals in mind. And what we basically did is that we went back to the very established qualitative research books in which they describe, for example, so-called trustworthiness criteria, which also translate to what we typically have in quantitative research, such as internal validity, for example. So, and these trustworthiness criteria are really important to provide this kind of transparency and traceability. And this is also what we took in the package as a guidance to set up the workflow which we propose in the package. All right, but before we get to the package, just very briefly, I think that's really a bit small, sorry. But I will walk you through anyway. This is just a quick overview. Some of you might be also very familiar with this. What we had before we had LLMs. We basically started with some kind of collection of material, for example, text, political speeches, whatever, and then we just chucked that in one bag, and we called this bag of words, because those methods which we had back then were not able to make sense of word order, for example. Yeah, and then we had different methods to choose from. The most simple one is a dictionary analysis, where we came up with a list of keywords which were important for our concepts, and then we simply counted frequencies of those keywords in our material. And then it got a little bit more sophisticated, for example, topic modeling, and then also word embeddings. And word embeddings basically paved the way to those transformers and then also to those LLMs we are working with today. Yeah, and the big difference maker here with LLMs is really that they are now able to capture, to understand context. So this is really the revolution of the transformer models and then also of the LLMs. They can also provide you with a justification of why they come up with a certain classification, for example, and they're really good with what is called zero-shot classification, which basically means that you do not need to invest a lot of time into creating a training data set, but you can just have a prompt, some kind of instruction, even without examples, send it to the LLM, and it will return surprisingly good results. Yeah, but there are, of course, a few data security and ethical considerations to keep in mind. This can fill an entire morning, and you might have also other sessions about this. So I will keep this short, but it's really important. One thing is sensitive data. If you are dealing with sensitive data, for example, if you do interviews and you would like to use LLMs to help you analyzing those interviews, it's really important that you can only go with open source. The reason is because these open source models you can install locally on your computer, so the data stays on your computer. If you use the closed models like OpenAI or Google and so on, then you upload your data to some kind of server, and then you basically give up control. So it's really important, if you have sensitive data, don't use closed models. Reproducibility is something which is also a little bit problematic with LLMs. Because you might have experienced this. You give in a prompt, you get a response. You give in the exact same prompt again, and the response is slightly different. It might still overlap, but it's slightly different, and this creates problems, especially if we are used to working with quantitative methods. We know that we like to have 100% reproducibility. We don't get that. We won't get that with LLMs, but we will talk later on about what else can be done. Yeah, transparency, I already mentioned. I really think transparency is really important when working with LLMs. But again, if you are using closed large language models, such as ChatGPT, for example, you don't really have any information about how the model was trained. So bias and all that kind of thing is something you cannot really know well, and also you can't really do much about it. And then the last point, which I think is more important, we do waste resources when working with LLMs. This is why it's even more important to work responsibly with them. All right, what else do I have? Just very quickly, so you do understand why we put this package together. We call it a package for qualitative analysis, but it's really qualitative analysis at scale. Nevertheless, what we first did is we looked a little in those classical qualitative text analysis tools. You might know them, NVIDIA, MaxQDA, QDA Minor, and so on. And they also start factoring in LLMs, but they do this in a very static way. So mostly you just have one interface, and then you can do some simple sentiment analysis without any great adjustments. And then you also sometimes don't even know what kind of model this analysis is based on. So all this kind of transparency and traceability, which I mentioned before, is basically not given. And then on top of that, it's also not open source and expensive. So we thought this is not really the tool to use here. Then, of course, you can code it yourself, right? With vibe coding, everyone can be a coder these days. And this is also great. This can work out nicely, but it will still take your time. Even if you do vibe code this, you need to check it. And it will take some time, meaning it can distract you from your original investigation, from your research question, and so on. Yeah, and then we also looked into what else is already available in R. We are working in R. Some of you might rather prefer Python, for example, but we think R is a really great language, and many of us, like especially in quantitative political science, for example, we just have been working with R all the way because it's so good for graphs, for example. And it has also been a great tool for text mining before we had LLMs. And there are already a few packages around in R. For example, Elmer is really great. We are also using it in our package, Ollama, and so on. But they're not specifically tailored to text analysis. And then we have, of course, Quantida. Has anyone worked with Quantida before? Yeah. So Quantida is, or used to be, the package for text analysis in R. It was put together by Ken Benoit and others. But it doesn't have LLMs factored in yet. And this is basically where we saw our gap and where we decided, let's put a package together. Yeah, and this package is what we call quallmer. It's actually developed together with Ken Benoit. So the one who also put together Quantida is now also heavily involved here with me, and he's really great. Yeah, what we had in mind was to really create a package which is very easy to apply, because we wanted to reach out to those people who have not yet had any coding experience. So even if you have never worked in R before, we are so ambitious to claim that this package is for you and that you will have an easy entry. It might still, there's still a hurdle, of course, to climb, but this was the kind of philosophy based on which we put the package together. Yeah, and if you wonder about the logo, any German-speaking, like Temilan, you know the story already, but any German-speaking people? So qualmer is a person who smokes a lot. And do you recognize the animal? It's a qual, right? But then we also have qual for qualitative analysis, and then, of course, the LLM, right? So there's a lot in there, and of course, it's AI generated. All right. Yeah, so I already said, we really want this package to be an easy entry for using LLMs at scale and for also making this entire LLM experience very simple. So what we put together in this package is basically a 5-step workflow. So these are all the functions in the package. And with this workflow, this is also what we suggest to stick with to make sure that you have this transparent and traceable research methodology in place for whatever you would like to analyze. Just to say already now, this is not limited to text, right? The package also works on images, on audios, and so on. So it's not limited to text. Most people are interested in some kind of text-based material, but also images and everything. It depends on the model. If you have a model who can, which can also analyze images, it's not a problem to use also this package for that. And it always starts very qualitatively by defining a code book. And this is basically what you used to do when meeting with your research assistants and telling them, here, this is what I would like to get analyzed. So in this code book, you describe all your concepts, you define what you are interested in, your research question, and how you would like this to get analyzed. You also define the coding scheme, and I will get to that in a minute. So because with this package, you can define very specifically how the output should look like. Then you code it with one LLM. Then you replicate it with other LLMs. This is part of the workflow because this helps you to identify the LLM which works the best. And it also helps you to say that there's a certain reliability across different models. So we don't recommend to just base this on one LLM, but to test different LLMs. This can also help to compare, for example, the performance of closed versus open source LLMs. Yeah, and then QLM compare and validate is precisely for this. They give you metrics, a range of different metrics. For example, the Krippendorff alpha value, which is usually also in, like, if you have different research assistants, you can use the Krippendorff alpha to show how much overlap there is between research assistants. And now you can do that also with LLMs. And then if you're lucky and you have some kind of gold standard data, meaning some kind of human coded data which is of really high quality, then you can also use QLM validate, because that will basically compare the LLM output against this human coded high quality data set. And then you get some kind of values such as precision, accuracy, and so on. And this can also be really strong for your argumentation in the paper. And then the last step, and then the workflow is already done, but this is also a really important step, it's QLM trail. And this is something really nice, because you just have one single line and it automatically creates for you the entire replication package, which you need to pass on to your colleagues, for example, in case they would like to replicate your analysis. So everything is already prepared, the data set needed, the code and everything. And it also prepares for you a very nice report, which you can also share, which you can add to your papers and so on, in which every single step is described, and your code book and everything, what you did in this workflow is documented. So this is what we mean by full traceability and full transparency. And you don't have any work with this, it's automatically created for you at the end. All right, so now let's quickly walk through an example and then let's code ourselves. So here, this example is from political science. How many political scientists are there? All right, a few. All right, but it's nevertheless, I mean, you can translate this also to other contexts. This was a publication which we did in 2020. We had 5,000 political speeches, not too many, but back then this was quite a lot. And we were interested in illustrating or analyzing whether authoritarian leaders talk differently to democratic leaders. And back then we used a dictionary approach, meaning I spent quite a few months in identifying keywords which are important for analyzing the language of political leaders. So this took me really a lot of time. This was the qualitative part of this. And then once we had this dictionary, we counted frequencies. And now what we want to do in the next few minutes, we just plug in some LLMs and do the same and see how much overlap there is. So the first is, as I said before, we define a code book. And this code book can be very long and detailed. Here, what you have here is a very small example. But you will see even this small, short example works surprisingly well. And what I basically did here, this is, as said, very qualitative. I simply defined illiberal rhetoric as nationalism, paternalism, and traditionalism, and liberal rhetoric as emphasizing rights, tolerance, and civil liberties. That's all what I did. And that is already quite a lot of information for the LLM, based on which it can actually classify quite well, as we will see in a minute. And then another important element, which you will also practice later on, is defining how the output should look like. This is really powerful, because if you have used LLMs before, they might be powerful, but they might return all kind of data, and then it's unstructured, and then you cannot really use it in your analysis, and then you still have to do some text mining and so on. So it's a bit messy. But with the schema, you can define very specifically and precisely how the output should look like. Here in this case, it's still relatively simple. We just say a scale from -10 to +10. +10 is more liberal, -10 is illiberal, and then also a brief explanation. But this can be much more complex. For example, if you do named entity recognition, you can also here do some nesting and listing and so on. So the schema is really a powerful tool for you to get precisely what you want to get out of this. And here are just a few options which you can use to define the schema. Right, so it can be fixed categories, it can be a numbered score, it can be open text. You can also define how long that text should be and so on. All right, so this is the code book. Then we code. Another one-liner, it's really simple. You just have this function QLM code. Then you define the data, the code book, the model which you would like to use. And then you can also name it. And here we are using, for example, this mini model 4.0, which is just really cheap, which is why we are running it here. But any kind of, like, the package works basically with any LLM which is around, because you can also plug in LLMs from Hugging Face, which have been fine-tuned, for example. So you really have a great choice of models you can use here. All right, then, as I said, we should not rely just on one LLM. So we factor in more LLMs, and this is QLM Replicate, where we, for example, now use Anthropic, Claude 3.5, Sonnet, whatever. You know, just plug in a few other models to test how different the results are. And you can also test different model settings. For example, here with temperature. Have you heard about temperature before? Yeah, so temperature is basically like if you go up, you get more creative results. And it's something between 0 and 1. And here we test a little bit more creative responses of the model. Generally, there's this recommendation to stick with rather low values in research, right? Because then we have better reproducibility. All right, then we compare this, and as said, this QLM compare function will give you metrics such as Krippendorf's alpha, Cohen's kappa, and so on. This is all something you can then report in your paper to illustrate how valid the output of your LLMs are. And then you can also, if you have a gold standard, get those accuracy, precision, recall, and F1 scores. Yeah, and now let's just briefly have a look at the results. It's very small print. Let me just see if I can make this a bit bigger. At least a little. But I will walk you through what you basically see here are all the names of the speakers we had in our data set. So you see here presidents of Hungary, of prime ministers and chancellors, Germany, like all kind of countries. The green dots are democracies and the red dots are autocracies. We also, like down here, we have Kim Jong-un from North Korea, and up there we have like fully fledged democracies such as Sweden, Norway, Ireland, Germany, and so on. And this is basically the scale which we had. So here 0 and above 0 is more liberal, and below 0 is more illiberal. So we can see that most democracies are scoring on the liberal side, as you would expect, and most autocracies, or all autocracies, are scoring on the illiberal side, as we would expect. And the major finding back then was that we had a few speakers, such as Viktor Orban in Hungary. He was still, like the country was still classified as democracy back then, but he was clearly already speaking in a very illiberal way. So this was one of our major findings back then. And what you can see now here is that the dots are from the dictionary analysis and the triangles are from this very quick and dirty LLM analysis. And of course, there is some difference, right? And this can probably be improved if we have a more detailed code book. Remember, we basically just had 2 lines in the code book. But overall, I think the findings are surprisingly similar because both the LLM and the dictionary analysis get this major outcome that Democrats talk democratically and autocrats talk in a more illiberal way. And they also get this interesting finding of those outliers. And those countries were already backsliding, as we call it. So we found this quite interesting, and I think this is also something which shows that there is something to using LLMs, because it speeds up your workflow, and it does produce surprisingly good results. Yeah, and then last step, if you remember, this is the audit trail, where we basically just use this QLM trail function, and then we get a complete trail data and also a nice replication report, which you can immediately share with your colleagues. All right, so this is how it looks like. We will practice this workflow in a minute. Just a few more slides on best practices. I think I already mentioned it quite often. Validation is really important. So LLM results can never go unchecked. If you have gold standard, you're lucky. Very often you don't really have gold standard data, right? Because it is expensive to create this kind of data. Sometimes you can rely on already existing data sets which are of really good quality, but you're not always as lucky. But even if you don't have gold standard, you can still get a few research assistants coding a sample of your data and then getting those inter-coder reliability metrics to see at least how much overlap there is, because this is also informative. And then you should never go without a manual review, right? So you should always subsample like at least 100, but my recommendation is at least 250 rows in your data set. You should manually check, just to make sure that you also understand how the LLM, like what kind of output there actually is, whether this is as intended, and what else is going on. Because very often there's also some kind of systematic bias, which you could then correct if you spot it. But if you never look, you just blindly trust. All right, and for this, we also put together an app which makes this easier, and we can also have a look at that app later on. But this is basically just an additional offer from our side, so you don't have to deal with Excel sheets. I hate Excel, so that's why I put together the app. Anyway, now very briefly, we already mentioned open versus closed large language models. There is unfortunately really this advantage that closed models typically perform better, especially if you have not yet fine-tuned them. And also if you just use them in this zero-shot way, as I said before, like without any additional examples and so on, they are really strong. The reason is capitalism, right? Because there's lots of money going into those models, and that's why they are so good. And it's very tempting for us as researchers to use those models. I also sometimes use them because, for example, in my case, I work with political speeches, which you can just download from the internet. So it's not a sensitive data case, and I do benefit from their high performance. But I do think that we need more money to make those open source models better, because I think that's, for us researchers, the better choice. Better for sensitive data, but it's also more reproducible, especially if we are doing fine-tuning and so on. Yeah, then good code books. This is basically like writing good prompts. You might have thought about this already. Be very clear. Try to define your concepts very clearly. You can use AI to improve your code books, right? To improve your prompts. And I think you just have to be ready for tests and refine. You need a few rounds until you have a good code book. So this is also not different from what we had before. It's called research, right? So it's like the LLM is great. It takes a lot of time and a lot of work from your shoulder, but not all of it. You still have to be ready to sit down and do a little work yourself. All right, that's basically it. We can also have a quick round regarding questions, maybe a quick break, but then I would suggest, like, how much time do we have? We are doing great with time. We have another 45 minutes, right? And that should be enough. So you also get some hands-on coding experience yourself. But let me know, is there any questions for now before we turn to the coding? Talal?
Great to see you again. So I think, is it correct for me to think that this is essentially this method is essentially content analysis or thematic analysis on steroids?
Yeah.
Or should I think about something else?
I mean, it can be more, but I think that's a fair description. Like before, you were kind of limited maybe to one case, to a certain amount of material which you could handle yourself, or which your army of research assistants, if you're lucky, you had a big grant, and then you also had more opportunities to go larger, but it was limited. And with LLMs, it really breaks those limits. So you can really go across countries, you can go back in time, you can really deal with a much bigger data set. But as I just said, don't think the LLM does all for you. You would still need to make this in a sound and robust way. You would still need to code a little yourself. And by a little, I mean a fair sample, such as at least 250 rows. That's also what is recommended in the literature as kind of benchmark. But if you can do more, but it's still less work than what you had before. So this is the advantage of the LLM. But just to also give you a little bit more comprehensive response regarding this, I think it can do more for you than just simple classification. So I think it can, like, the potential of using it as a qualitative research tool is much bigger, because before, classification was often just, a score 0 or 1. But now the LLM can really produce very long, deep responses about certain concepts and things you would like to analyze. Yeah, and I'm currently thinking about reflexivity and LLMs. So your supervisors would be interested in this. So I think it's a great tool to even go interpretive, but it's being developed.
Any other questions? Sorry.
What I have seen, you dealt with the European data set. For, like, Europe is a vast, diverse language there.
Yeah.
How for preparing your data, you translated all those in English, or you?
Good question.
How you deal with these issues?
It's a really good question. In this paper, we were lucky because we were only looking at political leaders. As you might know, any political leader is very vain, be it an autocrat or a democrat. So what they typically do is they have their website. On this website, they publish their speeches already translated into English because they care what other people think about them. It's really, like, great. Even North Korea has it translated in 5 different languages. Check that out. So it's really like we had a rich data set already translated into English. There were some exceptions. Turkey, for example, we automatically translated with machine translation tools. But there is research showing, especially for such old Texas data methods, that if you use machine translation tools, it's still really good. But now, what I'm doing right now is I'm looking at parliamentarian speeches altogether. And there I have a variety of languages, as you say correctly. And one way is to just translate them before you use LLMs. And there are already good LLMs dealing with multi-language settings. Just have to identify a good one. Depends also on the language, but there's information about, what kind of languages they have been trained on, so you can pick and choose the right one. But generally, there's like this tendency, bigger, more popular languages are better covered with those models. So if you have a really small, not very, not many people speak that language maybe, and it's also not very prominent in media, then the LLM will also have difficulties. That's the trade-off.
Okay.
Coming.
Can I ask you about if you can go back and edit a bit of your codebook for that study, what would you add into that line of code? Do you just
now, you mean to improve the codebook?
To improve the codebook?
More information. examples. You can also test examples. Then it's few shot. You remember, like I said, zero shot is if you basically just have the instructions.
Yep.
And then few shot is if you provide also some examples. And that already improves performance quite a lot. For example, now here, to make this overlap bigger, we could add a few examples of what illiberal language looks like.
Yes, I get it. Would it help if we give a bit of examples, say for the term, because I feel like you put it several times like nationalism.
Yeah.
Do you think it would help?
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
And I mean, I don't really know, but testing is all what makes sense, I think. So just have a few rounds. And this codebook is not limited to any kind of size. You know, if you have a really complex research question and investigation going on, such as first some kind of named entity recognition exercise where you just need the names of persons, for example, and then you would like to find out more about their influence or impact or whatever, the codebook can be 10 pages long. It's not limited to any kind of size. Yeah.
Sorry, I have a follow-up on that. I've noticed maybe it might be the fact that the models have advanced, but I've noticed in my PhD work and later on that if you have a very long context that you give to the LLM, it starts hallucinating. So if you give it a really long prompt, the performance deteriorates. Have you noticed the same or not really?
No, because with the schema where you clearly identify how the output should look like, you can, correct a little for such cases. It can still happen, and that's why validation is so important. I mean, it depends probably also on the model and so on. So there are cases where the model makes up something, but then in the schema, you can also can clearly say, if you don't know the response, just give us a 0 or whatever. Yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions?
No? Okay, then let's get hands-on. And for this, I mean, you all prepared already quite well by having R installed and by having downloaded this open source model. And what you can now do next, and do not yet open your R, just go here to this quallmer website. You see the link, like I can also go to the start site so you find it. But if you Google it, you should also land at quallmer. This is our website where we provide all kind of tutorials, examples, how you get started and so on. So it's a great resource, I think. And then if you go to workshops, let me know if you can't find it. But if you go to workshops and you scroll down, you see here I prepared something only for you, SICSS Melbourne. And the password is, guess? Yes, no, it's just 6. So 6 SE with double S, right? And then 26. So this should unlock the incorrect password. Hang on, what happened? All caps, yeah. All caps. Now here we go. And then you see this tutorial file. Are you able to download it? Let me know if you get stuck. Is it the password? (26) Unlock. Can you try again? Yeah, for example, I always get confused with the C and SS. And maybe you have a different, maybe you have different letter settings, right? No, not 26, just not 2026, just 26. Yeah, now it should work. And no space after. Perfect. And then you download it and then put it on your desktop somewhere where you can find it, right? It's important that you know where it is. Otherwise, you will have trouble in RStudio finding this tutorial file. So just drop it somewhere and then let's open RStudio. Who works with RStudio and R? Okay, a few. All right, so if this is a new experience for you, don't worry, R is great. And I will walk you through. So this is basically how R looks like. And in your case, if you have just opened it for the first time, it might be still blank, white, right? You can pick and choose. I prefer the dark screen because I think it's cool, but it's also a question of visibility. And this is something you can set in tools. So if you go to tools, you have global options, and then you can make such settings. In any case, what we always have in R is here on the top left is your script. On the bottom left is your console. So whatever you have in your script and whatever you send, like whatever you code, you execute, you will see in the console. Then here you have your files, your packages, and so on, and we will come to that in a minute. And then up there, you don't really see that right now. There's a fourth window where you can see, for example, data which you load into R. So you can also click on this. You see I have here some data already from previous runs. This is basically your setup. It's very simple and easy. It's a bit confusing at the start, but it's generally a nice and accessible tool. And if you have any questions, please always let me know. And now what we will be doing is that you go here. You see now where my cursor is, right? I can also make this a bit bigger. Let me just increase my font size a little. This is also where you can change the background and so on. So I go here now with size 18, just to make this a little bigger. All right. And now you can go here to Home and direct wherever you have your file lying. Like you see in my case, I have it already here in my folder called SICSS-2026. It's 26, right? All right. Anyway. But you, for example, if you dropped it on your desktop, you will find it there, right? Important is that you find the file and then you click on this file. All right, so as I did here, I have it in my SICSS-2026 folder, and then you simply click on this file called quallmer tutorial QMD, and then it will open up like this as you see it here on your script window on the top left. Does that work for you? This is the first important step. Sometimes this is difficult, and let me know, I'm happy to help. So I see it here open. You don't want to code along. Yeah.
R script?
Yeah. Okay. No. You just go with, go to Home. Where did you drop it?
Downloads.
Okay, then look for download. Where's your download?
Maybe I can just move it in one of those folders and then I can maybe open it up.
Yeah, you have to be able to find it. So try to put it somewhere where you can find it. Yeah. Yeah.
Stop.
Yeah, and this looks good. Yeah. It can be on desktop, whatever. And now you have it open, and we will continue in a minute. This looks good. For you, it also worked? Yeah, perfect. Let me know if you have any trouble. This looks good. All right.
Traffic.
All right. No worries. This looks good. Looks good. Looks good. All right. This must be boring for you, Temilan. And it's so good if you can help others. All right. Oh, thank you. All right. So I think most of you are able to open the file, right? Yeah, perfect. All right. And this is now a Quarto file. Who has been working with Quarto before? Do you like it? Yeah. I think it's the best tool ever. And Quarto doesn't pay me, right? But it's really nice. One of the huge advantages of Quarto is it's a bit like latex and overleaf, yeah, right? But it's better because you can integrate code directly So you have just one single file where you do all your writing for your paper, for example, and then you also integrate your code for the analysis. And if you, for example, have some update regarding your data, you just need to change one single line and everything updates automatically. Your figures, your text, everything. And I just love this. Like I have been much more successful publishing ever since I work with Quarto documents. And it's just the outcome is really polished and nice. So I really recommend you to get into Quarto. And we are also using this Quarto file now here for the tutorial. And what you see is basically the setup. And you can now also render. So if you click this symbol up here, then you execute the entire script. And then on this right side, you see this nice rendered HTML file. Quarto can also render into PDFs and into Word. This might be important for example, some journal submissions who would still like to see a Word document. So Quarto is much more flexible than LaTeX, for example. Does that work for you, the rendering? You probably don't have the nice quallmer logo, but apart from that, it should work. All right. And then what we basically do now is we code through this 5-step workflow. So you get to know each of these functions. And then later on, the idea is really that you can plug in your own data and start coding with the package immediately using your own data. So as you remember, we have the codebook with which we start. But in R, it's always before we can start with anything, we need to install some packages, right? And this might be annoying, depending how much packages you already installed. But installing a package is really great because every time you install a package, that basically means you draw on some kind of input from other people who invested in their free time capacities to build something new. So you benefit from this shared open source kind of culture here. So installing packages is always great. I think that's the message. And you have to do it once. And then every time you want to load, you want to work with those packages, you have to load them. So we are installing quallmer now, and also the quantida package, which I mentioned before, and the deployer package, which is like for basic data manipulation. And then we load these packages. And to do so, you simply run, like I'm now scrolling here to the first code chunk. The code chunks you can always identify by these 3 funny signs. Right? And this is not limited to R. In Quarto, you can also use Python code. You can use Julia and other code programming languages. It's not limited to R, but here we have R. And then we move with the cursor in front of the first letter, and then we go Control-Enter. Have you installed those packages before? Because I think it was also part of the preparation guide. Who was able to install the packages? All right, so if you have, okay, so most of that you have already the packages installed, so we can skip this, but we still need to load them. So you need to go in front of the L of this first library command, and then go Control-Enter, and then you see down there in my console, it also loads the package, right? Please let me know if there's any trouble, because without loading the packages successfully, we will not be able to work with them. Does that work? So go in front of the first letter. It's always like your first command is a bit tricky. So further down. Here? No, up. Where is it?
I can see R here.
No, but further up. You need to go on the very top. Yeah. And then down. And then you have the first code chunk. This is the first. You already installed those packages, right? Then you go to the second here. And then now you go in front of the L. And now you go Control-Enter. Yeah, perfect. And again. And again. Perfect. Now you set. Now you have those packages loaded. I know it's a new experience.
Yeah. The first code.
Yeah, you go to the here, front of the L, and then you go Control-Enter, and then it basically, look, you didn't install those packages yet. So we need to run this first. And now it installs the package. See, it works. And then you can also install the other packages. You need to install all the 3 of them. And this one as well. And then you can load them. So you go in front of the L again. It's still working on installing, but once it's done, you load the packages. Let me know if there's any issue. Any issues?
She doesn't. Oh yeah, we're good now.
Okay, all good. Any issue? All right, so all of you were able to load the packages? Perfect. All right, so this is now the preparation we need to do before we come to our codebook. And let me know if there's any issue. I'm happy to help. First time in RStudio is a bit confusing, but I'm promising you, you will love it. All right. And now what we have here is setting up your API key. Some of you choose not to have that, and that's fine, that's fair enough. But if you have one, here's also the instructions of how you can put them either directly in your script. This is the first option, something which I don't recommend, right? Because it's not so safe. Or you put them in your R environment. And this is much safer because not everyone can see your key. And every time you run a call with your API key, it automatically gets the key. So this is the safer option. Who was able to store it in the R environment file before we started here? Okay, so one has it set up, but don't worry too much. We can also change the model name in a minute, and you can run it on Ollama. You can come back to that tutorial and do that later on. For now, let's load some example data, and this can be later on your data, but for now we are working with these inaugural speeches of US presidents. This is a data set which is included in the Quantida package. So we are directly loading this from the Quantida package, again by going with our cursor in front of this first letter which doesn't have a hash key. Hash key is always some kind of comment, where you can leave some personal notes regarding your code. It's good practice if you here explain what you will be doing. Most coders don't do that, but especially if you wipe code, this gets better now with wipe coding because the LLM explains quite nicely each and every step. So you go to this inaugural text in front of the I, and then you run this again with Control-Enter, right? And this basically loads this example data for us. And then we can also have a look at this example data. So if you run the next few commands, you also see down here, in my case, this is a speech of Obama in 2009, of Obama again in 2013, Trump, Biden, and Trump again. We subset this to the most recent presidents only, here for educational purposes, but later on, you can really expand this. You can also take the full data set, or you can plug in your own data set. The size is basically not really limited unless you hit the limitations of R, but that takes you a while. Does that work, loading these speeches? Were you able to load them? Okay, perfect. So these are the speeches we would like to analyze now, right? And for this, first thing is that we define some kind of code book. Because we want to, for example, know how exclusive or inclusive those presidents talk. So the first step, code book. And here you see, again, this code chunk, which we also had on the slides before. So if you scroll to this code chunk, you can see there is a name. You can give it a name. We call it ideological scaling. A role, you can define like what your LLM should simulate to be. Here, you are an expert political scientist performing ideological text scaling. And then the instructions. Again, this can be much more comprehensive. Here we simply define inclusive and exclusive language. And then the schema. Remember, the schema is the scale. Here in this case, we want to have a scale. Here it goes from -5 to +5, +5 being more exclusive. All right? But this can be completely tailored to your research purposes. This is just an example. But let's run it. And again, to run it, we need to go in front of the I of the ideology codebook. So go in front of the I and then Control Enter, and then you will have the entire codebook in the system. Let me know if that doesn't work, because it's really important that R has the ideology codebook saved. Otherwise, we cannot run it. Did that work for you? Yeah, you see it here. So if it pops up in your data section, you are all fine. Did it work for you? Yeah, there is some kind of error. Yeah, go with, like, install all the packages step by step, because without, yeah, this looks good. Maybe you need to run it again. And maybe you also need to restart your R. Is that a Windows? Yeah, with Windows, sometimes there's a problem. If you want to restart, you just go to Session and then restart R. But first, like, there seems to be some kind of installation issue with, yeah, try restart R. And then try it again. But with Windows, unfortunately, with Windows, sometimes these issues are frequent. Yeah, not immediately solvable. So let's put it like this. But I'm happy to look at that later on again. For you, it worked. For you, it worked as well. Okay. Any other issues? All right, I'm coming.
That looks a bit different. So it's something wrong.
Mm-hmm. Did you load the package? Can you do that again and maybe also restart your R? Go to Session. Yeah, and then restart, and then just can you go up to the code chunk loading the packages, just to see what it, yeah, and then down again. Not this one, but the second, yeah, this one. Can you run this? Just so I see what. Okay, so can you install them first? It seems one package is not installed. If you run it step by step, you can also see better which one. No, I mean, go up to the code chunk before and run this step by step. Go in front of the I and then Control Enter. Okay. You need RTools. Okay, now go to Packages. So the Windows machine, for the Windows machine, you might need to install RTools first. So go to Packages, like we have now here another case of a Windows machine. Sometimes these Windows machines take a little bit more of our attention. It's just a little more, like, not straightforward, but it's not unsolvable. So go to Packages and then Install. And here you find RTools. Like, it's not popping up in my case because I'm on a Mac, but on a Windows machine, you should see RTools and then install that first and then run the installation of the packages again. And then let me know if that works. Depending on your Windows version, we might be able to solve it with that. All right, all the others, you were able to run the code book. So now the code book is stored, and now we can simply send it to the LLM. So this is now the second step. Here, like what you see now here below are again those different options you have later on in your own research projects to structure the output. So this is basically just for your information. So let's go to the next code chunk. So the next code chunk comes down here in line 86. And then again, go in front of the C for coded run 1. And as we said before, we simply have here the data, the code book, the model, and we give it a name. And those of you who do not have an OpenAI key, you need to replace this now, okay? And I'm replacing it now too, so you can code along just to make sure that you can also run this. And to be able to run an Ollama model, if you successfully downloaded it, the app also needs to be running. This is really important. And you see down here on my Mac, this beautiful llama symbol. This is something I need to click, and then the app is running in the background. So you also need to do that. You need to make sure that Ollama app is running, otherwise your model will not work, okay? And then once it's running in the background, you replace this line where we have the OpenAI model with Ollama. And then, look, my AI assistant tool is already suggesting the right one here. I don't know if you have an AI assistant tool. You can also benefit here from, this is Copilot, for example. But anyway, and then it even suggests the alternative, and that's nice. Anyway, okay, so this is what you need to put in here. This is the model you downloaded. I give you a minute to make sure like don't have any spelling error included. I just quickly check, did that work? Okay. And did you, after RTools is installed, did you, oh, okay. Can you quickly Google it? It depends also on your Windows version, but there should be this is a, I'm not sure, but this is a recurring issue, like RTools for Windows 10 or something. There should be a solution because this happens all the time with Windows machines. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Can I do the first thing that manually the code?
Yeah.
And then use the output from the human annotation and train the model on this section. Where is it? Is it? Yeah, for this one.
Yeah, yeah. You can put your examples in there. Yeah. You can either include them as text or you can attach them as a data file. So this is all possible. The codebook can be much more comprehensive. I mean, first I recommend you just run a simple codebook, but then later on you can include more data, more examples, and everything what you think is useful for the LLM to better learn the task. All right, any other issue? Are you able to plug in the Llama?
Yes. This and
3.2, but hang on, this looks wrong. There's a 2 too much. 3.2, then, yeah, now I think it looks good. No space in between? Yeah. How's your Windows going? Did you?
I installed the art tools.
Yeah.
Toolbox.
This looks good. And now install also the other packages and then run library. But it looks good.
It's a good now?
Yeah, it looks good. And install also the others, restart R, and then load the library. Let me know how you go. All right, so now we have the Llama model. Yeah. Yeah. Question? Yeah. Okay, so here's the question with the API key. If you decide to get an API key, you can't use your ChatGPT account, right? There's two different things. Like the ChatGPT account and the playground are two different things on OpenAI. So you have to go to that playground. I think you shared the instructions beforehand. It's in this PDF which you got beforehand. And there I shared a step-by-step description of how you can sign up for the API key. Have a look at that document. Let me know if you can't find it. It's basically just providing your billing information, but you need to do it in a certain way. And then you get an API key. And then you put that API key into your R workflows. All right, let's run this and let's see if that works. So now we go in front of the C and then again, Control Enter. And then you see here in my window, you see it's working. It takes a long time, like it only took 2 seconds, but this model is slow, right? this is a long time. If you use the OpenAI, it's just like you can't even see it. Like it's for those 5 examples, it just analyzes this immediately. But the Ollama models are a bit slower because they're not as big. But that was basically it. Who was able to run this without an error message? Did it run? All right. As I told you before, don't expect too much from the results, but this is just a model to get started. Now, we can also have a look at this. So if you go to the next code chunk, we can check what kind of results this model produced. So we run those 3, and we see if we run the scores. Remember, +5 was more exclusive, right? And we have here Obama, Trump, Biden, Trump. Does that make sense? Yeah, you would say so? Trump -5 if +5 is exclusive and -5 is inclusive? I think it's wrong. But at least, like, one good news is the model didn't go beyond the scale, because what happens very often with low performing models, they go beyond the scale. They just come up with 100 and you never defined 100 in your scale. So I think this is not very face valid because this model is just not very strong. But let me just quickly run it with OpenAI just to also give you this comparison. So if we now plug in here OpenAI, GPT 4.0, like the mini is really cheap. It's just costs like probably 2 cents for this, or not even. And if we run this, it's already quite good. And it's probably very different from what we just saw. So here, this is what OpenAI suggests. Yeah, I'm coming in a minute just to make this more clear. Before we had a -5 for Trump, right? And remember, +5 is more exclusive. And exclusive means anti-immigration and so on. And now we have a 3. I think this looks better. And this is how you can see the performance is really, like there are huge differences. And this is why it's so important to also test different models, because different models have different capacities. And here, even this mini model is performing based on those 5 examples. Of course, we would need to check more, but based on those 5 examples, we can see it's quite face valid, right? Also, the other Trump speech is at 3, and those other presidents, Biden and Obama, are quite inclusive. All right. All right. Yeah, okay. Okay, yes, that's good. You know, that's how you can test different models and then also come to an informed decision which model is working best for you. And here was a question. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If it's rating.
It's been
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if it that can also be this looks like issues related to, for example, that you have a key set up, but the billing information was not accepted, something like that. Very often they let you use the key but don't give you something. It's like, as I said, it's capitalism. If you don't pay, you don't get the service. In such cases, you probably need to check your billing information once again and set up a new API key, do everything again, put that in your R environment file, restart R. You might even just restart R. Maybe it even works after restarting R. But very often this is just because OpenAI does not always accept the billing information at the first time. I very often have this issue, and then once you do it for the second time, it works. It's a bit arbitrary, I have to say, but otherwise, like from the programming side, you did everything correct. That's the good news. Any other questions? Were you able to run it with Llama? So this is the second step, remember, but now we also want to do a few more things because we want to test, for example, just the same setting again to see how reproducible this is. So we want to just run the same model again with the same instructions and see how different the results are. So this is what we are doing here in this third step. Now it just runs again. And in your case, like you can see here in my case, there's slightly different outputs. With the Llama model, the results are probably very different. Did you run it again? Okay, I'm having a look. But you can already study like how different this is compared to what we had first.
Llama, it didn't show me the result in the
okay.
row, but then I used ChatGPT and now it says one request error.
And you had your API key set up? Okay, can you run it again? Yeah, go up. And then go in front of the C. And can you show me the model? Was the model correctly specified? Yeah. Okay, and then run coded run 1. Yeah, go in front of the C. Then scroll down. Okay, we see it strangely did some of the speeches, but not all of them. That doesn't make sense. But it means your API key is correctly set up. That's good at least. Can you restart your R and just run it again? Because like that's really not very rational that it does some, but not all. Maybe you didn't correctly load the data set before, but you have all the 5. No, that looks good. Now run it again. Yeah. Yeah, this one. Yeah. You need to load the libraries first. Sorry, you need to go up to the code chunk, loading the packages, and then run it and run the codebook. You just need to run everything again. Let me know if this process is strange, but it means your setup is correct. So it looks good.
Installing is coming the quallmer app, not the quallmer. Even I tried from here.
That's strange. Yeah. Yeah.
What?
Yeah. Install. It's still going.
Yeah.
Okay, I have a look later on. This is a very Windows specific problem. Like I have that like Windows is problematic. It's always some kind of issue. Yeah.
How is setting C different from the replicate that you guys are instead of like just putting a set seed to make sure that your code is
a seed.
Yeah.
I said
I'm not a qual person, so maybe that's why.
Yeah. A seed is maybe just testing one model with the exact same setup, and replicate is bringing in different models and different settings. So testing different seeds, so to say. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks.
That you work with Fontada, the person who developed Fontada.
Yeah. No, he's really good. All right, I think like one can hear the lunch coming in already, so I think we need to kind of come to an end. So let me just quickly show to you what else is missing down here. And you have that tutorial with you, so you can run through it at home in your own time. You can plug in your own data and so on. And I'm always available via email, right? So you can always write me if you keep getting stuck. Some issues are just taking more time, right? Window issues, for example, take more time. But don't feel frustrated. It's very normal. Like coding is about solving issues. So it's even making you addicted, right? Because like once you have that good feeling of solving an issue and successfully running code, this is really good. All right. So exactly. So what we basically do down here, May I just have quickly your attention? Just follow up on what I do. So we complete the script, and then later on in your own time, you can come back to your own setup. Just to complete the workflow. We replicated the exact same model. Now we replicate also with the Llama model, just to have another model plugged in. And then we want to compare that, right? This was also a really important step, that we get some systematic comparison of how good those models are. This is what we do here now. We compare all those runs we had. And now you see, you get automatically some metrics. Oh, sorry, we were here. Let's run this again. Here you see, Krippendorf's alpha, for example, is now at 0.36. Is that good or bad? Who has used Krippendorf's alpha before? Yeah, is it good? It's bad. It's really, it's crap. We can't use it. You can't get published with this. And the main reason is our Llama model. As I said, like this Llama model is really not good. It's like the black sheep, so to say, here in this setup. So we just put a hash key in front of this Llama model, and then we run it again just to see. Now, this is much better, right? Because now these are the high-performing capitalist LLMs. But this is how you can see, like, you can systematically compare this against other model runs and then also spot low-performing models. If you download a bigger Llama model, for example, instead of the 1B, put 70B, right? So you have 70 times the size. And that is a much better model. And you can go to the homepage of Ollama. There are many other, like they also have Qwen and a collection of different open source models, which you can use here and factor in. All right, and then to complete, we also have some gold standard, which we simulate here. So if I run this is now just a simulation of some kind of gold standard. We can also use this QLM validate and then print this. And this will also give us those metrics. This is now not precision and accuracy because we have a continuous scale. Precision and accuracy is only if you have a binary scale of either 0 or 1. But these are metrics for continuous scales of accuracy. All right, and then the last step to complete this. Here I also have an illustration of the quallmer app, but this is something you can check out in your own time. It's just a Shiny app, which helps you to do those manual checks. It's all well explained, so it's just an additional offer to help you with those manual checks. And then the very last thing down here is running this QLM trail. And if we run this, you see it saves the data object. Here, called ideology analysis, as I specified, and it also saves a report. Let's just quickly look at that report so I can also convince you. Like all of you who have dealt with replication packages before, you know it's a pain, especially if you got accepted with your publication and then you have to set up all this replication data. So this basically does this for you. This is how the report looks like. It's a Quarto document, which you can also render to PDF or Word. And it's very comprehensive. It specifies all the packages used. It specifies the codebook, the models. Everything is basically here in this report. So here you really have like also the replication code. Everything is there, and you can immediately share it with your colleagues. All right. So that's basically it. Let's see. I think that's all in this tutorial. And then later on, I also have some exercises here for you, but in 3 minutes it's lunchtime. So you can do those exercises after. And what I recommend is if you have any kind of use case in mind for your own research projects, I think the best is to just plug it in and test it. And the advantage of this package is really that it makes everything much more easier and clean in terms of what kind of code is needed. So it's really just this one line of calling an LLM and going through thousands and thousands of your data examples, be it text, images, or also audios. On our website, we also have tutorials where you can check out. Ken Benoit, my co-author, he put here an example with audio transcription, for example. Or also, like, a really fun example is actually the image analysis. So check it out, and always give us feedback if you have any troubles with the package or so on. And yeah, we just hope you find it useful. Thank you very much.
We got some time for a few more questions.
Yeah, of course.
Questions, recommendations, observations, thoughts?
Thank you for this. This was really fun, interesting. I just have a quick question for you. Would you recommend? You just recommend a closed model of 7B?
Yeah, 70 Bs. 70.
70.
Yeah. Can I write here on the? Is this to write on? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Instead of the 1B.
1B.
You just put 70B.
So that is that 70 billion parameter?
It's much bigger, but you can also check out like the way how you can call them is also documented here on this website. This is the Ollama website, the app you already downloaded. Yeah. And if you go here to models, you see these are all the models which are available, and it's really a lot.
Yes, that's true.
So you can also, look like here, translate Gemma. This is probably good for multilingual analysis and so on. And then it also tells you how to call them. This is the model name, how you can call them then in your QLM code function and so on. So I suggest, like, first you need to pull them in the same way as you pulled this very small model. Depending on the size, this might take 10 minutes, 15 minutes, half an hour. And also don't pull too many, otherwise you can not use your laptop anymore, right? Because it's still a laptop. You might be able to also have some access to a supercomputer. For example, at the University of Melbourne, we can use the supercomputer if you really want to. Yeah. So just like if you expand this collection of open source models, you need a better machine at some point.
Oh, I got it. Have you tried it? Would you say that we can get to I don't think we can get to the point we can surpass the open model, but it's similar performance, would you say? Have you tried this closed model?
Yeah, I think this Llama, like the 70 billion parameter Llama model is already quite good.
Okay, I get it.
Qwen is also good.
Yep.
And what else did I test? I tested different Llama models. There's also a Llama 0.3, like not the 2.3, but the 3, which wasn't, like, I didn't like it. It wasn't as good as the 2.3. Here I tested Qwen. Qwen is good. Qwen gets also lots of good feedback. Gemma. Yeah. Okay. Here's also DeepSeek. I think we're not allowed to use DeepSeek in Australia, right? Isn't there also a regulation? Yeah. I also am hesitant. I don't know. I watch too many science fiction movies probably, but I have this imagination there's some kind of communication still going on. I don't know. But there's really Mistral. I tried Mistral before, and it's not good. But I mean, you just have to test, and it depends on the task. Yeah, if you have a simple task, a simple, not too big open source model might be already good. If you have a more complex task, you need to have a bigger model. If you can't find an open source model and you still need to work with an open source model because you have sensitive data, you can do fine tuning.
Yeah.
I also provide workshops, like you find the links on our website, for fine tuning LLMs in Python. This is like more advanced stuff, but there are workshops around, and I do that. And so if you have questions, you can also reach out.
Yeah, I got it. Thank you.
So I just wanted to ask, since you also work at the VDEM data set, right? Are there any, I guess, interesting tips or advice to using these methods in conjunction with VDEM?
Oh yeah, lots. I mean, I can't tell you too much about what I'm currently working on because it's so exciting and it's not published yet. But we are working on actually getting LLMs to complement the coders, because VDEM uses expert coders. But for some countries, we have very low coverage. So I'm currently working on using LLMs to improve the data set. So this is on the back side. And like using VDEM in combination with LLMs could be really good. For example, if you want to make a case that, for example, it's now coming from my research fields, the quality of democracy, you factor in some VDEM indicators illustrating how the country does. And then you might have some additional assumptions about what else counts into this, what else should be there, which is not included in the VDEM dataset. For example, language. VDEM doesn't have a language-based indicator of democratic health. So this is something you could factor in, and then you could combine the two. But I think it goes very smoothly together because it's also so similar. I mean, VDEM asks expert coders, and you then ask the LLM. And you can also use that to cross-validate the results, for example. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I wouldn't really consider it as a gold standard because there are some problems with VDEM in terms of quality. Like telling you as like, having worked for VDEM, it's also like they're very open and transparent about this, but you can use it for getting some intercoder reliability scores, right? Because expert coders can also be wrong.
Would it be fair to say, because VDEM also contains subjective scales?
Yeah, they also have
So if you use subjective scales and then also you combine it with an LLM, for example, for cross-validation, it's just a lot of bias. It's already human bias, expert bias, the coding bias. And then you have also an LLM bias, which is really hard to investigate. So in this case...
But if the two still overlap, it says something about some kind of truth which might be going on, right?
Yes.
I mean, it's biased. It's not the full truth, but the overlap already says something, I think.
So it brings me to my, I guess, question also. Very, very nice flow here. I was going to ask about ensemble coding. So when you apply multiple, I guess there is a good way to determine whether the classification is more or less most likely to be correct by employing several models to do the same task, to do the same classification.
Yeah.
And then calculate the agreement.
Yeah.
And then if, for example, 3 different models agree with each other, most likely this is not like a very controversial classification.
Yeah, exactly.
So if they agree, like 3 models agree, there's a high chance that this classification is correct.
Yeah.
And then when you combine manual coding with ensemble coding, I think it's still important to do manual coding, right? But you can actually simplify your task by ensemble coding most of your samples and then manually addressing the ones that models disagreed on. And then I guess my question is, does the quallmer package help with it? With this?
Absolutely. Yeah. If you factor in different models and then you compare them, and as you say, like if there's lots of overlap, you have reliability, as we call it, and then you have an indication that you can really use any of those models and the results remain more or less the same. But then if, like as I showed with the very small llama model, you can also use it to identify low performing models. And then you just have to deselect them in your selection of models with the justification it's just not performing well on that task. But we definitely encourage to test different models.
I guess larger, like commercial models, they tend to perform quite well. Many of them, especially the modern ones, and then open models, they kind of lag behind.
Yeah.
Most of them, apart from I guess GPT-OS, that one is pretty good.
Yeah.
And Gemma models are pretty good, I think, the larger ones.
Yeah, I actually just came back from a conference in Belfast, a major political science conference, and we had lots of panels on LLMs. And there I heard that the open source models lag behind around 6 months. It's not a lot, right? And there were lots of discussions, which I found really interesting. There were lots of discussions on how universities provide access to AI resources. And there were like some people pushing for getting the full license of Claude Code, for example, which I think is $100 or something per month. And they wanted the university to pay for that. And others, like myself, argue we should not pay. Like we should not get addicted to those closed models and paying subscriptions like on university level, because that just makes us really like, it's like a trap. Like, how do you call those contracts? Like you can't get out anymore because you just need those models then so much. But we should rather take all those this money and invest into open source, because if they just lag behind 6 months, I think if we push that a little, we do have the performance which is comparable sometime soon. So I think that was good news.